Hello, welcome everybody for this panel on skills for a future that works. I'm Sophie Fay, I work for the French news magazine L'Obs, and I'm really happy to moderate this panel. We know today that there is a link, an obvious link between level of skills and level of unemployment, and that high unemployment is concentrated on low-skilled workers. We know that employment is rising for high-skilled jobs, and that as a consequence, job market is very polarized and will continue polarizing. So when you're a government, the issue of skill should definitely be your top priority. And this for at least two reasons: for your public finance purpose, for your public finance adjustment. We've seen in countries where unemployment decreases that public finance problem is generally solved, and that you can't solve public finance problem if you don't reduce unemployment, and you don't reduce unemployment if you don't work on skills. And it's also very important to reduce inequalities, and what we see today is that training today tends to maybe increase inequalities, as low-skilled workers tend to have less access to training than high-skilled workers. So this is a really big challenge for us today. So we're going to discuss this in our panel: how can government, union, businesses design the best skill strategy for a better future? And we have a fantastic panel to do that. First, I would like to welcome Professor Soumitra Dutta. And, well, you know, he has a very long bio. He is a member of the advisory board of 3 business schools: ESAD, HEC Montréal, and ESCP Paris, not the worst one. He is a member of the board of 2 big companies which require very different kind of skills. Sodexo, which is a caterer, so they have both high-skilled and low-skilled workers, and Dassault Systèmes, who obviously needs very high-skilled workers and workers who can work on innovation. He is also, I could say, a pillar of the World Economic Forum of Davos, and works on the Global Future Council on Innovation Ecosystem and does this report. And he's also an entrepreneur. He created several companies like Fisheye Analytics. So I must say, special skill must be ubiquity. I also welcome Guillermo Elizondo. Guillermo is at the far left. Guillermo is the CEO and founder of Territorium, which is an education tech startup. It's not a startup anymore because it's already have 1 million users. And I will let Guillermo explain a bit later on what Territorium does. It's a personalized online ecosystem for learning, but it will give you a better insight. Thank you, Manuel Hector at the center, to be with us. Manuel Hector is the Minister of Science, Technology and Higher Education for Portugal since November 2015, and he's also a teacher in the engineering school of the University of Lisbon, and he has been to Imperial College, University of California, San Diego, University of Texas, Austin, and Harvard. So he has a good knowledge of the education, the best education system. And so, well, his skills today should be to have very large shoulders, because his prime minister, we published an interview of his prime minister, António Costa, in our magazine this week, and Mr. Costa, the prime minister of Portugal, says that he really relies on skills to improve Portugal potential growth. So this is your responsibility is very high. Thank you very much, Sandra Sancier, to be with us tonight. Sandra is a senior partner at McKinsey, and she is one of the lead author of the Women Matter report of McKinsey, and also one of the leader of the Women and Future of Work initiative at McKinsey. Well, your special skill should be dedication and tenacity, because we've been trying to improve opportunities for women for years, but we're still lagging a little bit behind. And Randy Randy Weingarten. Thank you very much to be with us from the States. Randy, you are president of the American Federation of Teachers, and it's 1.7 million members. Well, I would say your special skill is to be very proactive and to launch many initiatives, because IFT has launched an innovation fund to support improvement project developed by members, by teachers, which is really interesting. Randy has also developed an initiative called Share My Lesson, in which teachers can share free educational resources, and really created by educators for educator. And well, she also did many things like a partnership to distribute free books to children, and a partnership to transform education in one of the poorest countries in the US. So please welcome our fantastic panel. Before starting the discussion, I'd like us to watch a video done by the OECD in its initiative I'm the Future of Work. And and I'd like to thank OECD for all this emphasis they've put on skills, because if it wasn't for PISA and the PISA and the PIAC initiative and PISA and PIAC studies, maybe we would less focus on this issue, and they really help government and design policies, but they also help media to try to evaluate these policies, because it's very difficult to grasp them. So please, let's watch this video.
When I went to high school, I felt that it was where I belonged. I loved learning. I loved watching my teachers engage us and challenge us. I said, they go to work every day, they have fun, that's what I want to do. I still, to this day, feel like this is where I belong, inside of a high school. I'm Angie Hankus, and I teach at Niles North High School in Skokie, Illinois. I teach engineering and computer science. Being a female in the engineering computer science world, it is difficult. Most of my colleagues are male. I even had people tell me, like, are you sure you want to do this? It's going to be very hard. But that just gave me more motivation to do it. So I've had many female students tell me that I've motivated them to go and major in engineering or computer science when otherwise they would not have. A lot of female students wouldn't even take these classes if it wasn't for me being a female teaching it. A good day at work is me being able to reach the students, being able to get them to collaborate together and see that light bulb go off, that moment where they actually walk away saying, wow, I learned a lot, that was really cool. That's really my goal every day. It's not only about delivering content to students. It's so much more. We want them to be able to take the knowledge we give them and take it further. It's very important that the union is there to fight for all of our rights as teachers. If we didn't have a union, which some schools in the country don't, I would not have the nice classroom I have, reliable health benefits I have, the low class sizes that I have. I feel optimistic about the way the world of work is changing. The skill set is just going to change. So I want more students to learn coding, to learn programming, to learn how to work on those robotics, to learn how to work on that automation, because they will be then the ones that are doing and programming and fixing the AI. My job is much better than my parents because I love what I do. I come home at the end of the day and I'm glad that I'm a teacher. I don't remember my parents coming home at the end of the day like loving what they did. If you do something that you love and you're passionate about, you'll be happy with your career.
That's quite an homage to the union, Randy. And there are plenty of these videos on YouTube or on the OECD website, and they're all very enthusiastic. Thank you, OECD, for this job. You know, first of all, I'm very curious to know how governments can, prepare their strategy to enhance skills, as it has become so important. And I'd like to know, Minister Manuel Heitor, how in Portugal, how you work on this, how you prepare the higher education system, how you prepare your strategy on science, who do you work with, how do you assess all the needs, and maybe you can give you your vision of that and the way you work on these issues.
Sophie, thank you very much, and welcome you all for this informal dialogue. First of all, there are no recipes, and I will use throughout all my interventions. We certainly live in a knowledge-driven society, but more and more in a learning economy, one that we need continuously be adapting. And therefore, once we know for many, many decades that knowledge is increasingly social, and the social activity, you need to involve and to engage more and more partners. Actually, in the last, say, 5 years, there has been an open discussion about the public nature of knowledge in general and of learning. And essentially, we know that there are, above all, a discussion on open up the access to knowledge and to science, but more than, or as important as opening up the access, is also to engage people in a participatory process, and more to turn education and knowledge relevant. And relevance is only done through excellent work. We need to make sure that the knowledge is always, or as always, being developed with an excellent referency, and also that knowledge creates employment. And this relation between knowledge and employment has become critical, particularly in countries like Portugal, but nevertheless, as a small country, for our internal market, but also to attract people from outside. For example, in the last 3 years, we have doubled the number of foreign students in Portugal. And by opening up to external boundaries, we also build national trust on our own education systems. We believe in times of increasing globalization, and therefore the commitment between the local impact and the global scene has become more and more important, in a way that enlarging those which have access to the education system has become critical, and that can only be done if we diversify the context of learning. Different schools should behave differently from each other, and this can only be done by an autonomous and to providing autonomy to the schools, to the teachers. Certainly, each school level behaves in a completely different and should behave in a completely different issue. I'm particularly working on higher education and what at the OECD terminology we call post-secondary or tertiary education, which certainly rely very much on the autonomy of the institutional context, and therefore the way governments believe and behave are essentially in providing resources and assessing the use of resources. At the same time, the autonomy of the educational topic is particularly critical. I will start like this.
Thank you very much. Sumitra Dutta, you are a board member of two big companies. Can you explain us how they think about their skills and how they anticipate the skills they will need tomorrow?
Thank you very much. So I've had the privilege of being associated with companies for quite some time as board members, as a consultant, and also as an entrepreneur myself. And I think it's useful to step back and ask what are the big forces driving business. And it doesn't matter which sector you are in today, I think it's fair to say that the two big forces are digitalization and globalization. So it doesn't matter whether it's Sodexo or Dassault Systems or another company in another sector, digitalization and globalization is creating change at an increasingly rapid pace, and companies are in fact under pressure to provide the right kind of people training, the people development, such that the right strategy is supported for the further business development. Now, how do you actually make this happen in organizations? I want to go back to the minister's initial statement. There's no one recipe. Each organization has to, in fact, find its own solution. But what is important is, I think, two elements. The first one is we have to be able to combine the digital skills with the human skills. The two have to be brought together, otherwise the system does not operate. So even if you take, let's say, a catering business, one might think that the frontline Sodexo worker or another catering company who is serving a customer needs to have the right human skills, the right people skills. Those are very important, obviously. But in today's day and world, where products are getting digitized, the food being prepared and the food being served is as important as the information about what food is being served, what are the calories, what kind of peculiar personal characteristics the consumer has, what are the allergies, what are the health requirements. If you're able to combine the two effectively, that's what makes a good, effective worker in today's environment. The second comment I want to make is around innovation. Because you need creativity, you need people who are able to create for the future. Because often a lot of the developments you can't predict. Sitting out today, it is very hard for most businesses to predict what business will look like 5, 10 years from now. So you need people who are creative. And the challenge really is, how do you unleash the creativity? I use the word unleash very carefully because I do strongly believe that everyone is born creative. But something happens in the school years and the college years that somehow diminishes some of that ability. As a small test, look at a 5-year-old child. It doesn't matter which society, which culture, in Africa, Latin America, France, and India, China. A 5-year-old child typically is very observant of the environment, is observing very carefully. It's constantly asking questions. In fact, sometimes you get tired of the questions they ask. It's constantly experimenting, sometimes breaking things as a part of the experimentation, but is persevering, does not give up, keeps on, in fact, trying to do things, push the boundaries. And when the small child has problems, the small child goes to a support network, siblings, parent, uncle, aunt, for advice, support. Now, there have been studies done looking at what are the characteristics of innovative managers. So people we think in companies were innovative, and it's very similar attributes: observing, questioning, experimenting, being persistent, connecting the dots, having a good support mentor network. These are the attributes of successful, innovative leaders. So if a 5-year-old child, every 5-year-old child has that, why not every employee in the company have the same attributes? So the challenge that we have right now is to be able to unleash that creativity of a 4 or 5-year-old child in our employees. Now, how do you do it? Of course, there is no one way to do it, but companies are realizing now that there's some things you have to do inside the company to create the right innovative support culture, and some things you can do outside the company. An example of something you can do inside. Many companies are now creating small routines, like innovation routines, that can actually get employees to think creatively, to be able to have the space to experiment. Some companies are, for example, giving some proportion of the time free at your own liberty to explore different ideas, different projects. And there are other possibilities on that front. From the outside, many companies are now bringing in startup partnerships and saying, well, you're working in our organization, why don't you actually go and spend time working in the startup organization? Some companies are in fact basing the employees in new work environments like in WeWork or on university campuses. So there are a variety of techniques you can use, but the two key elements in my view are combining the digital skills with the human skills, and second is unleashing the creativity inside your employees through the right combination of internal and external means.
Thank you very much. Sandra Saucier, I was wondering, as a consultant, how do you advise your clients on these topics? And, you know, especially a few years ago, you didn't imagine that McKinsey was consulted by a big firm to set up a training scheme, for instance. Is it the case today?
It's a good question. Listen, the way we see our job is to help companies improve and achieve impact. And we realized actually a long time ago that performance was a very short-term proxy for what a corporation can do. And what you were saying, Sumatra, which is that actually the way an organization behaves, the quality of its people, the quality of its culture, how innovative it is, are much better indicators of how a company will perform over time. So we've been working on these topics for a long, long time. But where you're completely true is that with this big digitization revolution, it is even more important than ever. Our view today, so the way we help our clients is by providing them a view of what the future will look like, even if I agree that's a view we have today. And part of the future is about being agile. But when you look at the way we see the future, the McKinsey Global Institute has done tremendous work, actually also based on OECD data, at understanding the jobs and the skills and how they will be impacted by automation. And guess what? 50% of the jobs will be impacted significantly through automation, AI, you name it. At the same time, for 90% of the jobs today, there's only 10% of the job content that will change. So you could say, okay, not a big deal, just an evolution, not a revolution. Yes, but for 30 to 40% of these jobs, they will change by more than 30% of their content. So when you're a person, I don't know for you, but when I have to move from one version of the iPhone to another, I'm lost for a week at least. So imagine having my full day, I mean, half of my day or third of my day change. That's a big evolution. And that is what we need to help the employees prepare for. And that's where corporations have actually a very big role to play. So it is not, in our view, mechanistic. To your point, when we look at the skills behind the jobs, everybody's talking about the new skills, the advanced technology skills. It is true that they will grow dramatically, 55% in the next 10 years. At the same time, they will still represent less than 10% of the jobs. The most important skills of the future in volume will be the social and emotional skills. That's where, Sumitra, what you were saying about digital and emotional together is absolutely, and human together is absolutely critical. And the other part that will grow is the higher cognitive skills. So these are, for me, very inspiring trends. But to your question, Sophie, how do we then help companies prepare for that? Well, they all have very different needs. So we help them understand in very granular way what will be the jobs of the future for them, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. These are long cycles. Then we help them understand the skills behind the job. And then we move to how can you retrain over a significant period of time people to new skills. And so we are now designing training curriculum for 20,000 people or more on very different kinds of skills. So that's how we support this change. But a very inspiring one.
Thank you very much. Randy Weingarten, we saw in the video that teachers play a unique role to develop one of the most important skills, which is the ability to learn, which we will need all life long, the ability and also the pleasure to learn. And I want to ask you two questions. You know, one, as a teacher, how can a government better help teachers to do this? And the other one, as a union, how can you help government maybe design or correct the strategies for enhancing skills? And also, Minister Heitor from Portugal said he had given more autonomy to schools and to university. That was part of the Costa program. What do you think of this question of autonomy?
So we believe in, let me just say, we believe in autonomy, but you need to have two foundational pieces, and you will hear me agreeing with Dr. Dua a lot in terms of the way in which he talked about the problems and the solutions. Notice with everything that everybody has said, school teachers, pre-secondary, meaning from pre-K to 12th grade, and then post-secondary, are training or attempting to train for every single one of these skills that people have talked about. And so the three things that we are fixated on right now is that we need to help people drive for a better life. That requires a voice at work and a voice in democracy. And I sit at the vortex of both the union movement and the education movement. And so let me see if I can answer those quickly. Autonomy is important, but you need the investment and you need the freedom to teach. And so if it's autonomy just for a school, but it's still a top-down situation where there's too much of fixation on data and not enough of or testing or teacher proofing, and where teachers, because Dr. Duda is very right, in K-12 all throughout the world right now, people seem to leave innovation, creativity, ingenuity at the schoolhouse door. And something happens in schools in terms of the way they are organized. And I just actually gave a speech on this at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. 3 weeks ago, called The Freedom to Teach, and how we bust out of that. Because we need to seize the future. We understand digitization and globalization are here to stay, and the advancements are profound. But it does not extinguish the need. Frankly, it increases the need for human judgment, for context, for nuance, for social emotional learning, for that application. And then the issue becomes in schools around the world that we can't just have one model that somebody then says, oh, let us replicate, because there is no one-size-fits-all. But what we can do is we do have strategies that we can use, to borrow a gym expression. You develop the muscle of using those strategies. So if we focus on things like well-being first, the well-being of a child, so that a child feels safe and welcomed in a school. You heard the wonderful teacher Angie say this. So you focus on well-being. You focus then on powerful instruction, like project-based instruction, where kids then see that there is something at the end of that line, the end of that rainbow. You look at robotics or debate that I taught. I taught in Brooklyn, and I taught debate to basically my kids from the Caribbean. And they beat schools that were far more wealthy than our school. but they got into it and they got engaged and they practiced their tenacity and their resilience and the relationships, and they learned how to connect the dots. There was an article that was written a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago by Jal Mehta in the New York Times op-ed section, which said, why is it that we give teachers so much more autonomy after 3 p.m. to do extracurricular activities, but not before 3. And kids, they had done a 6-year study of high schools in America, and kids were saying, students, young adults were saying, they loved their extracurricular activities when they had them, when we had money for them. And why was that? Because teachers were meeting and sparking their needs, like the robotics competition, debate competitions. So the issue is, we know and understand that we must deal with and should deal with and embrace digitization and automation and AI. But teachers need to have that freedom to teach. Yes, it presumes that teachers know what they're doing, and we have to have a decent evaluation system, but they need to have that freedom to teach. They need to have the benefit of the doubt that every one of us on this stage gets in our employment situation. In terms of unions, and I can go on and on about, we have lots of examples about how to do this, but the real issue is, how do you sustain and scale those examples? And how do they become the norm, not the exception? The second piece about unions is, I think unions actually provide one of the solutions to that. Because what unions do is they actually give regular working people power. They give people power to actually bargain for their benefits, bargain for working conditions, bargain for decency, bargain for fairness. And in a world that we have right now that is increasingly inequitable, and where we have an exacerbation of wealth versus poverty, we need to actually give working people the power to actually try to navigate good conditions for themselves, and that's what unions do.
Thank you very much, Randy. Listening to Randy makes me think that you have to work too while we are talking, because you had this, you can answer this little BCAST poll. You have 2 questions to answer with multiple choice answers. One question is, how can we best encourage workers to continue developing their skills throughout their lives? And this question of the union and getting unionized is not one of the choice, but it's quite important. And the second question is, how can government do better to encourage more purposeful teaching practice in the classroom? So, please. And you can also use BCAS to ask questions, I think, for our Q&A session. Guillermo Elizondo, I won't try to explain what Territorium does, because you will do it much better than I do. But can you tell us how you can help in defining the skills people need and people want, and where they can find the possibility to enhance them?
Yeah. So Territorium is a personalized learning ecosystem. When I say a personalized learning ecosystem, it's a software that reads all the learning experiences that a student has, and then we create a complete profile of the competencies and abilities that they are developing towards all these learning experiences. And then we connect to the job market. We connect with LinkedIn, we connect with Indeed, with several job posting sites, and understand what are the competencies and abilities that the job market is looking for. We find the gap between the student and what the job market is looking for, and we create a personalized learning path for each student so that they can develop that gap. So basically, my co-founder and I, we created Territorium when I was in high school. I'm still young, not that young, but we were in high school, and what we saw is that no one was measuring all these competencies we were developing in the extracurricular activities you were saying. We only got A's, B's, C's, on some of the courses, but no one was measuring what we did in our basketball team. No one was measuring what we did in the robotics team. No one was measuring all these abilities that most of them were non-cognitive abilities. And that's the abilities the job market is looking for. In our system, 77% of the jobs that are posted in our system and we get from other systems ask for non-cognitive abilities. And where are we measuring them? We are not measuring, and we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago in New Jersey with ETS, and we were talking about that we are not measuring these abilities before a student's admission, when they get to the university, when they are inside the school, and after they're in school. So, for example, we don't match which of these competencies are creating the most performance in the job market. And that's basically what we are looking to address in Territorium. What we see is that we actually have a system that is based on a degree in the case of higher education. So for example, and there are several areas of opportunity. For example, I'm a software engineer, and Alejandro that's here is also a software engineer, and Catalina, that is part of my team, is also a software engineer. But nowhere in that degree it says that Alejandro is a better analyst, that I'm a better programmer, and then Catalina is a better consultant. And the job market is not looking for the software engineer. They are looking for the analyst, they're looking for the consultant. So basically what we see is that education is not a series of courses that you take, because not necessarily because you take a course, you have the competency. It's like a movie in which you live several learning experiences, no matter which type of experience, curricular, extracurricular, and internship. And all these experiences create competencies and abilities. And we need to create technology that can measure these competencies and abilities, and then relate that to the job market. We believe that technology can do more now that we have artificial intelligence. Most of EdTech technology is focusing on how to grow maybe MOOCs. I saw that when I read before this panel. And we have MOOCs, for example, but it focuses only on creating the same system, but is massive. You have MOOCs to give courses massively. However, we have been focusing on efficiency in the past years, and that was the model. How can we create students that are the same? However, now we don't need students that are the same. We need students with different competencies, with different abilities. And we believe, and we strongly believe, that AI, artificial intelligence, can help us with this, to understand each student, to personalize. The big problem is that we are not personalizing, that we are not seeing what is the purpose of that student. And we strongly believe that if we help students find their purpose, workers find their purpose and work on their purpose and understand what's the path to work on that purpose, we will have happy people. And if we will have happy people, then we will create productivity and we will create social development.
Who is actually who are the customer of your technologies?
Yeah, so we mostly work with universities. We work with training systems, vocational training systems. Here are some of our clients. Here is CONALEP from Mexico. And basically, we work with universities to make the transition on being a competency-based learning school, of how we can transition them to take all the information of these learning experiences and convert them into competencies. Now we work with 1 million users, mostly in the Americas, like US and Latin America. And what we have found is that we can increase the employability rates, we can increase salary rates if we understand each of the students and we create the right learning path for them.
Thank you very much. It's a good transition to talk a bit about the relationship between technology and workers, because we tend to, even if the OECD videos are quite optimistic, we tend to fear technology and think they are the enemy or a big threat for workers. But Sumitra, I think you disagree. When we prepared the discussion, you said you strongly disagree with that, and that technology might be the ally of the worker in its reskilling scheme. So
No, actually, I do agree with you that the general tone of the debate around technology and jobs, technology and human society today is negative and content. And this is in stark contrast to, let's say, 20 years ago when the internet was just starting to get commercialized, when there was big hope for the new utopian world, perhaps, a lot of empowerment of people around the world and a lot of access to free information and a lot of good things for society as a whole. I think what we have to keep in mind is a lot of those good things have happened. So today, most of us would not be able to imagine our lives without having access to Google or to Amazon or some other kind of online travel agency of some kind. So online life has become very much integrated with the daily life. So that all has been very good. I think what has not happened equally well is some of the unintended effects of technology has been negative. And that has been negative for a number of reasons. Some is technology related and some are actually human related. People misuse technology for specific reasons. So I think now the challenge for us is, given that technology is going to be more and more important in the lives going forward, that's very clear. It's not going to decrease in importance. The challenge for us is to turn the debate around from fear back to hope. Hope for a better future. Hope for a future in which technology actually helps us to become better human beings. So I always argue when I teach, for example, at Cornell, my course in digital transformation, I always emphasize that you have to put people first. It's people first and technology second. If not, technology will just simply dominate the whole discussion and we'll be driven down one narrow path. So I think it's a question of choice that we have to make as leaders, both in companies and also as leaders of tech companies, of putting people first. I think some of our tech leaders today haven't done that, and they haven't actually proven good role models for the industry. So we need good role models among the top tech companies. We need good leadership decisions among other companies, and we have to be able to balance the two properly to be able to give people that hope that technology will in fact lead to a better future.
Let me add on these comments and also remember that more and more we need also to learn from brain sciences. And there is an increasingly way to better understand the linkage between essentially neurosciences and the way education provides. For instance, in the last few years, a number of articles and published papers and books has clearly indicated, among many others, that our brain needs to learn new things, and therefore storytelling among the other things, but the idea to be always and to provide a dynamic environment, including the interchange between teaching load and physical exercise, the way kids play and enjoy, and above all, the way our brain learns to disconnect. And for instance, recently, a very well-known experiment done either in the United States, in England, and in several continental European countries have shown the way kids react in exam if they have a mobile phone in front of them or if they left the mobile phone at home. And so we are able these days to learn more and more from the brain sciences and in general from neurosciences how can we improve our ability to learn and to essentially, as just mentioned, to have a humanistic view of our society, put above all people first.
In France, we have, well, the Minister of Education and Parliament have decided to forbid high school kids to and pupils in general to come to school with a smartphone. Do you think this is a good move, or on the contrary, on the opposite, should they, be encouraged to use their phone in the right way to learn better?
This is the debate that is roiling the United States. And many districts now have said that kids can bring their smartphones to school, but there are ways of locking them up, or because what we have seen in is that they are really important in terms of safety, in terms of bringing them and communication. But what happens is that kids' faces are in their phones as opposed to building relationships with others. And so many districts in the United States have tried to figure out ways that says that we have to find ways that kids are not using them in class. There are lots of other computers that people use in class, but part of the issue, I think, and I want to just go back to what Dr. Duda was saying, is that we have to actually, what I was trying to say earlier is that we went through this in the profession of teaching about 5 years ago, where technology companies raced in, and there was a fear that they were attempting to supplant teaching and learning as opposed to supplement. And our union and others took the position, not of fear, but of embracing with conditions. And talking about how this must be supplementing, not supplanting. The human endeavor was very important. And what has happened, fast forward, over the last couple of years, is that many of the tech companies who have been wanting to make sure that technology is part and parcel of a K-12 system or a pre-K-12 system, have now understood that they must work with teachers and collaborate with teachers for the technology to be successful. And so I just wanted to, but the instinct was, particularly because of privacy concerns and access concerns and bias concerns, that those fears would be impediments to actually saying, let's try it, assuming this is supplemental instead of supplanting.
And continuing what you're saying, so what I like about the video is that the teacher, what was her name? Angie. From
a district right outside of Chicago.
Okay, perfect. So what I like about her is that she said in the video that teaching was not about delivering content. It was about making kids do things, right? To develop skills. And the thing here is that technology should not be a software to deliver content. Technology should not be used like, hey, have the smartphone, I will send you content, I will supplant the teacher. That's not the use for technology in the classroom or in the school. What we should focus technology in the schools is that we can give data to teachers, so that teachers can see each of the skills, use neuroscience to understand each of their kids, and then take decisions of which content, of which activity, do with each of them, so that they can learn better. That's something that we should do, and that's what technology should do, help teachers, not supplant them.
Thank you. I have a question on MOOCs. You mentioned them earlier. I was wondering if if we know if they work or not, because I know many people who started MOOCs but never finished them, because learning is also a question of group dynamic and interaction. And when you are behind your computer, you start your MOOC and then you give up. What are your experience of it? That they work or not?
Sure, they work, and I believe that has become worthwhile. But it is also clear, more and more, they do not replace, they do not and they will not replace the school or the university as a place to go and to be and to interact with each other. Now, they complement, and particularly when they are used by teachers and by higher education institutions to complement and to provide and to develop competencies of self-learning, are particularly important. Again, is to put people first. Will never replace the living space of an education institution, which more and more will become an incredibly important process where people interact with each other and essentially are curiosity labs. The way we deliver information is changing, but the physical place is increasingly important beyond the way MOOCs have been used, which are more and more platforms for self-learning and to help stimulate self-learning abilities.
So I agree completely with the minister said, and just to add to that, if you think about the sustainable development goals around education or around health, technology is absolutely vital to achieving those goals. I mean, there are enormous populations of students in many emerging markets who don't have access to quality education. So MOOCs certainly provides one possible way to provide that access. But having said this, what you are seeing happening is interesting business models emerging that combine MOOCs with traditional face-to-face education, maybe delivered by less skilled professionals, combine MOOCs with traditional programs in some of the best institutions. And I think our challenge is to come up with this right blended model that combines the power of technology with the potential of what is possible in combining the digital and the real world.
But let me add also one point. Actually, we have learned this over the last few years very much in Portugal. More than the question of being digital or no, being a MOOC or no, is the time duration of training. And we clearly see throughout education systems worldwide, also from the employer's point of view, a clear trend of short training courses, either in a pre-advanced education, in initial education, or in a post-grad, and in both directions for reskilling or for upskilling. And that is also very clear, for instance, in the last World Economic Forum report of the Future of Jobs 2019, the clear trends on complementing traditional education and traditional degree programs with short training. And the MOOCs there play a very important role to shaken traditional environmental educational institutions to provide more and more short training in articulation with traditional training.
That's very interesting. Are we going to move to are we going to add something new to this masters and PhD, or all these long degree?
Well, there are already. There are in the career tech ed space. We don't call it vocational ed anymore. You have lots of different kinds of certifications, which are kind of micro, it's a micro degree, for lack of a better word. I don't think that really works. But so you see this in apprenticeship programs, you see this in high school programs, you see this in other post-secondary programs where you can get a certification that then becomes monetizable, like a welder certification. You can have various different coding certifications. But what we've seen, I just want to push back a little bit in that we see a lot of online learning as part and parcel of other kinds of learning. But a lot of the work in post-secondary now is a clinical practice or a career tech ed project-based practice, which requires a physical place to practice and design and to build. And that becomes very important, that is part and parcel of post-secondary. And the last thing I want to say about this, though, is this, and I don't know is that there has been a shift, unfortunately, in America, that the cost of this post-secondary education is now assumed more and more and more by individuals and less and less by governments. So 41 states now spend less on public higher education than they did 10 years ago. And there is now $1.5 trillion of student debt in America, post-secondary student debt, owed by 44 million people. So the post-secondary conversation is really important, but the issue of economics rears its inequity head as well.
Guillermo, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, so basically continue the conversation is if you use online learning, basically it's a way of transferring knowledge, but what we want is people to apply knowledge. And what we see is that universities and schools will transform into a place in which students can experiment. It's a controlled space to experiment several learning experiences. The online education will help for those experiences. But the most important thing here is how they apply it and how we create technology to understand how they are applying it and to create these certifications, but that show the evidence that the student can do it. Not necessarily because I take a MOOC or because I take a course online. I already have the competency. I need to show evidence of that. And that's something that we should address.
Randy, do you think this issue of who pays the burden of higher education will be one of for the coming presidential election in the States? And do you think it could change? Because you know the American model has influenced a lot European models, especially in the UK, where now if you want to be a nurse, you have to go through you have to go to university and pay university fees, which you can never reimburse with the wage of a nurse. So it creates a conundrum. So it would be great if the US changed before it does more damage into Europe.
Well, we agree. But I do think you'll see this, you know, just like so many other countries, America is a very polarized place right now. And I'll just give an example. The Democratic candidates are taking all of this on, from Elizabeth Warren talking about how to forgive or extinguish current student debt to Bernie Sanders talking about free college. And there's a whole bunch of proposals in between. The Republican minority leader of the Education Committee in the Congress calls all of this socialism. So there is, but I will say one thing, which is that when high school was important as a condition for employment, in America, as well as so many other countries, we made high school a public good. And in some ways, I think we need to make post-secondary a public good as well throughout the world.
Let me comment on this, because it is very much an issue of the social contract, which certainly depend very much from different parts of the world. Even in Europe, the diversity is very, very large. But one key measure is the penetration of higher education. In Europe at large, we have only still 4 out of 10 kids of 20 years old participating in higher education. Say 42% is the average European. In the United States, we have about 50%. And certainly a key issue for Europe at large is to enlarge the penetration of higher education, which certainly do require a better commitment between the individual effort and the collective effort, because education do have both collective and individual issues. And in this equation, we need definitely to include the employers, because most of the benefit goes to the employers. So it is not just a question between individuals or families and the state at large. We need also to bring the market and the employers at large, particularly through fiscal incentives. And that is what, particularly, you see that trend in Nordic countries, completely different from in Southern European issues, and also throughout the Americas, you see a quite diversified set. Definitely, we need to enlarge the penetration of education, and the idea of a public good and education at the post-secondary level as a public good is certainly the ultimate goal of our modern societies.
Sandra, do you want to add something? Because McKinsey helps, when you recruit, you help students paying back the fees to you.
We do, and we also work. Our own social activity is called Generation, and it's a very large-scale endeavor by which we are bringing students close to employers, because we are at the same place where you are, which is that we realize the gap is between education and employment, and making sure we train for the right jobs. But if I may just go back to what you were saying on the employers, I do believe is absolutely critical, because we've been talking a lot about what happens till we graduate. But as you do know, we tend to live longer and longer, and the environment is changing faster and faster. So it does mean that we will have to be trained and retrained all the way, throughout our lives. And that's where both actually government and employer, in my view, have a big role to play. You can choose your model, you can choose to empower the people. There's an American company, for example, that has chosen to communicate to its employees what will be the skills of the future. And I love that example because they communicate, how they see the future. Then they also put some training online. They had to stop their employees because they were going through this training non-stop during the weekends. So, it's about how do we think about empowering the people, but getting the companies to participate, because as you're saying, they will be working for their own good as well.
Let me just add a very brief, I don't want to monopolize, but we must clearly understand that education has a cost. And so to consider education as a public good is not to decrease that cost. The issue is how to share the costs and how to share risks. A recent experiment over the last 3 years in Portugal, in order to employ, to increase this engagement of particularly the business sector, but also public administration, is the building up of what we call collaborative labs throughout the country, from agriculture to fisheries, to space, to digital transformation, involving several public and private actors, research employers, to build own labs where they can share education, research and innovation, to share risks.
In fact, Germany and Norway do this kind of tripartite commissions of employers, workers through their unions, and government, to try to navigate through all of this, and where there is a sense that how do you share both the burdens and the costs, particularly for small employers that will never have the money to actually do the training. And so if there was a way of connecting those dots in an upskilling way, in a post-secondary way, but where you had employers and unions and government at the table, as they do in Norway and in Germany, I think we would actually be better at solving a lot of these questions. Certainly the alignment.
I just wanted to make one comment, and I have to be careful in what I say out here. I spent 20 years as a professor in INSEAD in Europe and 10 years in the US in Berkeley and at Cornell, so I have sort of both comparisons. And if you look at the ranking of the top 20 universities in the world, the majority of the top 20 are American universities, typically the exception of Oxford, Cambridge in the middle. If you ask the question, how do the two continents compare? And this is my individual point of view, is that America is a very polarized society in many ways, and it's so true in education too. The peaks in the US are higher than the peaks in Europe. The average in Europe is higher than the average in the US. It's a very simple description. Now, the reason I mention this is because if you are in the peak, let's say you're one of the top institutions, Stanford, MIT, Cornell, Harvard, and so on, the tuition that students pay is actually not the tuition you see on the published rate. These universities are very rich, and they're able to offer tremendous amounts of financial aid. Today, these top universities typically give about 50% or more back as financial aid to the students. So actually, on average, students pay less than 50%, or in many cases, they get a free ride completely, full scholarship. Second, one reason why these universities are so good is because they have the freedom to compete for talent. Talent of students, talent of professors. I have seen universities, most universities in Europe, most have strong government controls in terms of what they can pay faculty. And I can tell you, in a top school in the US, you have no controls whatsoever. And essentially, top talent, whether it's in physics, biology, business, law, medicine, they are very expensive. It's very much like a game in football stars and other kinds of social stars, in which for the peak you have to pay premium prices. So I was a dean of a business school, and I ran the budgets of a large business school, and there is no way you can actually afford to pay this kind of prices without having that kind of income coming in. So I'm just trying to not justify it. I'm just trying to say there is a bigger picture out there which justifies, at least partially, at least to the top schools. This does not remove the problem. A lot of average Americans have paying a lot of money for sub-quality education across the country.
Yes, it's a good remark, because we have very good economists in France, but they all moved to the States. So not all, some stay at the OECD. Maybe we can see the BCAS poll results on the screen. Because I was interested in your answer on how can we best encourage workers to continue developing their skills throughout their lives. And so, well, this idea of a skills report card doesn't seem to work very much. Financial incentives, I would have thought that financial incentives would have been higher. Randy, do you want to comment on that? And also I wanted to ask you a question. Is there a relationship between the rate of people unionized and the intensity of training?
Yes and yes. So, this is not, and I saw as the answers were rolling in, it can't be an either or. We need both training, and we need to have a livable wage for both teachers and for other workers. And and that is part of the social compact that we had throughout Europe and America immediately after post the World War II era. And that seems to be eroding in many different ways. I'm sure people are aware of, we've had a lot of teacher strikes in the United States. The root cause of them has been the disinvestment. And there's been, but if people are selling their blood plasma to make ends meet, or doing a second and third job to make ends meet, then that means we are disserving the children of any country who really need their teachers to not be the highest paid workers, but to have a decent middle class. So when you see both of these things, on both the work setting and in the teacher setting, it is both. And we believe, as do the construction trades, that professional development is a very important part of what we do as a union, and that upskilling is very important as what we do as a union, that we don't outsource it to others. We actually try to be part and parcel of that delivery system.
But Sophie, let me comment on this question, because I believe the question is, I would say, a wrong question. It is not fair to ask how to encourage workers. The question, in my view, will be how to encourage leaders and employers to promote long life learning among themselves. Because certainly, for instance, what we see, the transformation in Portugal, which has become a very entrepreneurial culture, which is a new generation of business leaders, of small tech companies, which are completely changing the panorama and the relationship between the business leaders and the employers and the workers themselves. Moving from, say, old-fashioned, low-skilled companies to a completely different type of companies which essentially live out of addressing sophisticated markets which are global, will provide the incentives to the leaders to essentially work with their workers and provide working. So we should worry in governments and worldwide how to encourage leaders to really promote lifelong learning.
Can I add something on that? Yes, we do, but we also need to work a lot on transparency. Last year, I worked on a report on the future of work with a gender lens, because that's the topic I'm absolutely passionate about. And I realized, looking at what the future will be for women, that if you don't understand that the places where jobs will happen in France are the health sector, that the places where there will be the highest number of job creation in Germany is manufacturing. Even if you have the skills to fit those jobs, but you don't know, and you stick to the industry where you started, you're stuck. So I do believe, and I don't know if it's the governments or the employers together, but I realized at that moment that creating transparency to empower, it doesn't mean that it's or, I think we need to do both, is a critical element. Again, because I think we've grown into societies where things were stable. So you were growing in an industry, you were growing in a job function within an industry. And the rhythm of change makes it difficult for a big brother to have the best ideas for you. You need to be aware and able to craft your path as well, in my view.
So transparency, what kind of transparency on the offer of training, or on the...
Transparency on where the jobs will be created, what kind of skills. I mean, I think what you were saying was fabulous. What kind of skills are needed for the different jobs? And this thing about you can be trained, it's not because you've left school too early that you can't get there. So all these ecosystem that I'm sure you are all working on, of where are the jobs of the future, working with the employers, what are the skills that will be needed, what are the ways to get those skills, right. And then offering actual training options to individuals. If we get that ecosystem working, I feel very positive about the future of work.
And just what do you think, what can be improved to enhance opportunities for women? Because you've been working on that for a long time, and there are progresses, but not so much.
This gender lens could be also a diversity lens. The title of this session was, or is, what are the future skills? Or skills needed for the future. In my view, the future will be about diversity or won't be. When we look at the characteristics of startups, of companies that are very good in technology, what they display in terms of characteristics, of leadership characteristics, actually correspond to the characteristics of diverse leadership teams. So we looked at companies where there are more women, and they do display participative leadership, giving meaning, purpose to people, etc., etc. So I do believe the future is diverse. Then when you look at the numbers, it's very striking. We've talked about tech, but tech for diversity is either a great opportunity or a great threat. As we all know very well, the STEM pipeline, so the ability to train young girls for STEM, is very difficult. Today we have less than 17% of women in tech jobs. When you go up the ladder, it goes very, very fast to 15 and 10 and less. So in the leadership positions in tech, if you take this view, you're like, there's no way out. The future will be about, again, the century of non-diversity. But at the same time, what we did was look at, numbers. We believe in numbers. We looked at France and Germany, the two largest employers in Europe, and we looked at how jobs will be added in the future versus destroyed. And the participation rate of women will actually increase in France, stay stable in Germany, because women today do occupy jobs in growing occupations. So healthcare services, they are very well represented in what we discussed. Emotional skills, cognitive skills, and so on and so forth. At the same time, they are lagging behind in two categories: advanced technological skills and leadership skills. And my sense is, as leaders, both of government, education, and companies, we can either let things, happen, or we can say this is the opportunity of the century. Because what we've been talking about, which is this new way of skilling people, the whole hundreds of millions of employees who will be reskilled. What if we were taking a gender lens to that reskilling? If we were to say, even in manufacturing in Germany, we only train 50-50.
Randy, Guillermo, and then we'll take your questions.
I would actually just say a gender and a race lens. Because and we have to be very thoughtful about leadership and because people need to see themselves and the possibility of themselves in leadership places. And so we've been spending a lot of time on those kind of questions. So last thing I would say is it's both transparency and support. And Sophie, you raised that we have an innovation fund. One of the things we've done is in Peoria, Illinois, we actually are the key partner to this kind of tripartite commission of employers, government agencies, the mayor of Peoria, who is a Republican. It works with me, a Democrat, very closely, which is very important. We have created pipelines for internships into the jobs of today and tomorrow in Peoria, and we have actually gotten several hundred kids into these kind of pipelines. But it is both the kind of transparency of what is available, and people see it in high school and post-secondary, but also making sure the support is there to, as you were saying, to kind of apply the knowledge and make sure the mentoring and the clinical practice is there.
And the important thing here is that it's not only company leaders, government leaders, also education leaders or institution leaders. They need to create, and we need to work in creating a common language around skills, so that we can say we need these skills, and it's the same around the world, not only in one country, because, for example, we have something in Mexico, we have something in the US, but it should be internationally. The same skills, and what we refer to skills should mean the same. So it will be easier for workers, and that's how we could incentivize them, if they can know exactly what they need to do to get those skills. And also one important, the other thing I want to say is that if governments, I will say, always do like a study around skills or a research around skills or what the job market is looking for. And I will say here around technology, we have a lot of that information already posted in a lot of places. The important thing is using that big data, convert it to skills. If we have a common language, it will be easier for us, the technology guys, to do it. And create really what everyone is looking for in real time. And if we have it in real time, we will create not training systems, but we will create learning systems. And when I say learning system, it's a system that will learn about people and will learn about the job market and create these learning paths that will help everyone get the better jobs.
Thank you very much. Do you have questions in the room? So there is one that you asked online, is why isn't there a student on this panel while they are directly concerned? Well, we'll ask you to the OECD for next year.
I graduated 2 years ago. So.
Thank you.
Hello, my question is addressed to the expert in education, professor, minister, and and then the other to the organization. Lately, we start reading about big companies, particularly in the US, that they no longer require their employees to be educated or higher educated. Now, where does this take us in terms of, like, students? And then for the corporation, would you hire people that they don't have a proper education? Would you favor, let's say, vocational training or just skills over education, of proper education?
This is a very critical sentence that we need to be very careful, because any type of figure at the world level in any region shows that certainly employment level and salary levels depend much more and correlate with the education level and not with no education level. So I should correct that. And essentially, even during the years of the financial crisis, we clearly understood that long-term unemployment was essentially and was kept for those with no skills. Those with skills have always been able to move out of unemployment, and we know today with data, again from many, many regions worldwide and certainly from Europe, that the levels of salary increase much, much faster only with the level of skills. And for those unskilled, they will never upgrade. So particularly one of the key issues in the political debate is to build trust on the education and on learning systems.
Both, what I often say is that virtually everyone, you will always find exceptions, needs to have some post-secondary experience. Post-secondary experience, whether it be rooted in career tech education or whether it be rooted in a traditional higher education, whether it be a community college, whether it be apprenticeship program. It is absolutely essential to help transition a young adult into the world of work and the world of life.
We have a question on Anthony's through BCAST. How can SMEs who are responsible for more than 70% of productivity retrain their older employees and hire younger ones when the funding criteria, funding and investment is focused on criteria that are not compatible with this training spending or this business model? Do you think it could change, Sumitra or Sandra, this funding model and the way investors will one day look at the capacity of training for SMEs, or will bank take this into account?
I think SMEs, I'm not fully sure I agree with the question. I think SMEs also have a lot of opportunities for education. The challenge is that they often don't have the time because they're very busy themselves building the businesses, and or they start with lower levels of education per se. They don't necessarily have the ability to upskill easily. So clearly having government programs of various kinds will help, and many governments do it. Also using these online programs for those who are self-motivated can help. So I think the technology is helping making the situation easier and not difficult for them, except that the pace of change and knowledge is increasing. That makes it difficult on one side.
Another question in the room? Maybe, yes, and then here.
Yeah, I think we can build the trust among education that the minister is asking for by developing the common language that Guillermo is asking for and the evidence that his company is providing. The Open University of France, UK and others have developed a common micro-credential framework. Just a few features, how to spot a trustworthy micro-credential. And this can be extended also to face-to-face learning. And if we have that kind of common features, you can have a much wider demand and supply meeting each other for short courses, for training and retraining, because we talk too much about initial and not enough about the lifelong.
Thank you.
Maybe I want to add something.
Yes.
the thing here is, if you see in several businesses businesses, we have seen, and it's a really good book, A Platform Revolution. You see Uber, you see Airbnb, you see several businesses that business models that are changed by a platform. And what hasn't happened in education is that we have a platform for education, or this platform revolution. And when I say a platform revolution, something that will connect all the learning experiences, that will connect the job market, that we connect the micro-credentials, the testing services. That's what we should focus on. We are working on that, but that should be the focus, and governments should work together towards that.
Question here?
Hello, I am Yaprak. I'm representing ISEC in France. We're the largest global youth-led organization. And I'm also a current student here in France, law, yes. Unfortunately, I am not able to do thumbs up because I am not very much happy with my studies. So I want to bring that into context as well. Because, for example, yes, I am a student law, but I am taking a gap year from my studies to be part of ISEC, which is the platform that I'm actually able to develop something. I am currently head of product in ISEC, and I have around 100 people under me in a leadership movement. However, I am still in anxiety, like many of my peers, because I know that when I'm finishing my experience, if I don't have a diploma, if I don't have something that will be acceptable by employers, I will not be a good employee in that sense, or my rates of being employable will be really low because of the, like you say, for example, average university that I'm graduated in, but in next to it, I have skills, but I don't have the platform to show them to the employers. So, and we are talking about the future of work, cool, that will happen, as you're saying, in the next 10 years, but all the things that we are speaking, like, I don't know, from my perspective, what I'm hearing is long-term changes of policy and everything. So what do you think that should have been done, like, in this very moment to tackle these issues? Because if you're saying that the job market will change exponentially, like in the next 10 years, what do you suggest we as students, as young people, to do, like in school or in next to it, to deal with anxiety, to deal with how to develop more skills and to be more employable in the sense of the global job market?
You need a union.
you need territorium also.
Have you ever thought to create your own company?
Yeah, I will tell you a little bit about my story. So, my co-founder and I, we created Territorium while being in the last years of high school, just beginning college. I almost dropped it out, but I work with universities, so I couldn't drop out. It would seem weird. And the interesting thing here was that no one was measuring what we were doing in our company. We were developing a lot of skills while building the company, what you are doing in ISEC. We were developing a lot of leadership skills. No one was measuring it. And it was really interesting because when you go to the graduation, they say the names of everyone when they're graduating, and they say magna cum laude and all the stuff that they made. And when I got up, they say just Guillermo Elizondo. And no one recognized those skills that I developed. That's why, and that's why I like you say that, because I feel like you, I felt like you. And that's why we created this software in the case of Territorium. We wanted to create something that will measure all the learning experiences, no matter where you have it. Because I assure you that you're developing more skills in ISEC than maybe in a leadership course. And we need to get that data. That's the important part.
And you're going to give her your card, right?
Yeah, of course.
Well, thank you very much. We have to end this panel, unfortunately, but we have a few policy recommendations for the OECD. Sandra mentioned transparency on the future of the job market to help us choose our lifelong training. No recipe, no one size fits all. It's one of the general conclusion that we can share. Autonomy for universities and schools, and to have a better way to teach. Cooperation, tripartite cooperation between governments, union and businesses, and never forget the human side with the digital side. So thank you very much to you for these recommendations. Thank you to you for your attention.
Perfect. You left so quickly, I didn't have a chance.